I would love in the chat if folks would just kind of say what neighborhood you grew up in, what city and town you're from. What else should we ask them now?
You know, I like that specificity, like not just like where you're from, like what state, but really give me like the areas, give me the intersections, give me the name of your town, your name of the city. Are you in the borderlands of Orange County and Los Angeles County like I am? You know, what's your area code? You know, like I think the more specific, the better, because we start to see when we really kind of map ourselves, we cover a lot of ground.
Absolutely. Any landmarks? We're just talking about malls, your favorite taco stands, where you get your favorite foods from, whatever they might be. I would love to learn more about all of you. And we'll save this chat so that we can share it with others.
El Sereno, Boyle Heights, Southside, I love it. See, look, mira, we're all from LA, but not really, right? Like, no, be more specific.
And that's I love it. I love it. And, as a Tejana, as your resident Tejana, I love, that I'm in this LA space, right? LA area space, learning and engaging in a history that is not mine, but is very much my sister, family, brother, sibling history, right? Like these are my family members. And I'm really enjoying delving into this history together. Welcome everyone. My name is Anita Revilla. I am a professor at Cal State LA in Chicana, Chicano, Latina, Latino Studies. And I just started there last fall. I was teaching before that at UNLV for 15 years. And so this is my 17th year of teaching. And I love what I do. I love learning. I love teaching. So I'm really grateful to my colegas who are here today, helping us on that learning process. I want to formally introduce you to Melissa, my good friend, Melissa Mora Hidalgo, who was born in Montebello and grew up in the LAOC borderlands of East Whittier and La Habra. She holds a PhD. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it. I love it.
She holds a PhD in literature from UC San Diego, and she's the author of a book called Mozlandia, Morrissey Fans in the Borderlands. She's also an active journalist for LA Taco. She's a professor at Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Fullerton. And I know that one of the things that I have really appreciated about Melissa is that, or Dr. Hidalgo, is that she's busy documenting her experience and her community's experience, her family's experience throughout the city and the state. And she's doing it internationally, she's doing it locally. So it's really beautiful to see the way that you've charted the experience and cultural dynamics of your community and literally of your own family, right? And your family's connection to these really important spots that you're talking about. And even the article that we got interested in today is connected to your partner who is from El Monte, South El Monte specifically. And we would love if Stacy wants to come in and say hi later, but she doesn't have to. But we're looking forward to reading her piece in the book.
Absolutely.
And then I would love for my colega Danny to introduce himself later. Rafa might join us as well. We're part of a collective that's trying to do like co-teaching individually, but together of a class called CLS 1200. It's a class, race, class, and gender, Chicana and Chicanx and Latinx specific. So this is our first speakers of that series, and we're inviting all of our classes and communities into this class or to this talk. Danny?
Sorry, I wasn't prepared. I thought later meant later, but.
Oh, no.
Hi.
Just say hi.
Hi. Again, I'm Daniel Topete. I'm a lecturer at Cal State LA. I grew up in El Monte. I grew up in Medina Court, and like I was mentioning to Professor Hidalgo that this book and these articles and the KCET series is bringing back so many memories. I'm like shooting it to everybody that grew up around us, and it's just like, look at, I was listening to the podcast too, and it's like this sense of like this pride that folks had from El Monte, and it was like, I don't really know how to articulate it, but we know it's something's there, right? And it's like I think it's rooted in the community, right? And I think you know, I'm really excited about this talk. So thank you very much.
Yay, gracias. Go ahead, Dr. Hidalgo.
I just got to say gracias too. What an honor to speak to your students and to speak to Cal State LA students. You know, as your prof said earlier, I'm also, I teach at two other Cal State campuses locally, Fullerton and Long Beach. And, you know, and I just feel still very privileged and humbled to have this job right now at this time to teach the classes I get to teach. I teach in Chicano and Chicana studies at Fullerton, as well as women, gender, sexuality studies, both at Fullerton and Long Beach. But you know, my background is in literature, Chicano lit, more specifically cultural studies. And so that's where a lot of my work kind of comes from. But I think, you know, I spoke to Profe Revilla earlier, and I would like to read, if you all don't mind, from just a little bit from a few pieces that I know that some of it were posted, not just from the East of East book review that I wrote, but I thought I'd read a little bit from one of my favorite LA Taco interviews and articles I did, and also a little bit from the article I wrote about my Chumash lineage. And so I chose these three because they're all so connected by place. So to kind of speak again about the transnational connections, Johnny Marr, Manchester, UK, Irish roots. I ended up in Ireland on a Fulbright doing work on Chicano, Latino, Los Angeles fans of a Manchester Irish artist, right? So the more local you get, the more you dig in, the more you realize we're connected. You know, there are these histories that we share. So the three, I'm gonna read three little sections. The first one is from the LA Taco article I wrote interviewing Johnny Marr. So those of you who might be Smiths fans could enjoy this. And if you don't know who the Smiths are, if you don't know who Morrissey is, that's who I wrote about. You should look him up. Again, rock stars from the 80s. So I'll say that much. The section I'm gonna read from this is where Johnny Marr is explaining his own connections to Los Angeles and his personal ties there and his musical influences. Let's see if you recognize the LA tie. You might. Johnny Marr has some great LA stories, and they all come back to music. After settling in the booth, we jump right into the conversation when he notices the Kid Congo Powers and the Pink Monkey Birds pin on my jacket. I like that, he said, smiling. I learned about Marr's admiration of Kid Congo Powers, the La Puente-born punk rock guitarist of the Gun Club. And this is where my internet connection is failing me, so excuse me while it reloads. Here we go. So Kid Congo, the La Puente-born punk rock guitarist of the Gun Club, the Cramps, and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, who named his solo band the Pink Monkey Birds after a David Bowie lyric from the song Moon Age Daydream. And I found all this out while researching my 2016 book, Mozlandia, Morrissey Fans in the Borderlands. Quote, it started as I was discovering glam rock in the UK. They were formative years, and glam rock connects with LA, says Marr. I was a 10-year-old boy listening to Bowie's Aladdin Sane, and it blew my mind. The first songs Marr taught himself to play on the guitar was Jeepster by T-Rex, another important influence. After the Los Angeles connection to glam rock, Marr pointed to the legendary club promoter and DJ Rodney Bingenheimer. Bingenheimer is often credited with introducing glam rock to Los Angeles in the late 1970s and 1980s through his club Rodney's English Disco, and on the air as a DJ and host of his show Rodney on the Rock at K-Rock. Around that time, the burgeoning greater East LA punk scene introduced the world to roots blues punk bands such as X and the Gun Club. But it was the unconventional LA pop rock outfit Sparks that Marr says was his initial introduction to LA. In the early 1980s, he found LA's The Gun Club and New York's The Cramps. Brian Tristan, or Brian Tristan, stage name Kid Congo Powers, was the rocking guitar maestro from Bassett High School, who played for both bands in the early 1980s. In a 2014 article by the South El Monte Arts Posse, locates El Monte and the greater San Gabriel Valley as critical cultural sites for the emergence of homegrown punk talent that eventually became very influential in punk culture internationally. This musical talent included Jeffrey Lee Pierce, founder, singer, guitarist of the Gun Club, and Kid Congo Powers, quote, Chicanos of mixed background who grew up in the SGV. To the young Mar in Manchester, just starting to write songs for his new band, The Smiths, the sound and music of the Gun Club, the Cramps, and Kid Congo's guitar, excuse me, and Kid Congo's guitar playing in both bands served as fresh inspiration. As Mar explained, they had a very left field aesthetic and approach to music compared to the dominant electronic sound of UK popular music in the 1980s. In the 1980s industrial Manchester, their sound was considered unusual and sexy, said Mar. He was attracted to the, quote, swampy, rootsy, live style sound of these bands. At one point, Mar considered the Gun Club the best thing around. Their musical influence on Mar ran deep enough to inspire the rousing riffs on the Smiths' global mega hit, How Soon Is Now. And that's the one that's do, 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 do. I am human and I need to be loved. That's the famous song that Kid Congo, excuse me, inspired. These routes of 1980, oh, see, let me go back. Their influence on Mar ran deep enough to inspire the rousing riffs on the Smiths' global mega hit, How Soon Is Now. Noting similarities between himself and Kid Congo is working class, informally trained, self-taught guitarists who both found creative inspirations in punk rock and punk music and glam rock, especially David Bowie. Mar says he could relate to the Gun Club and Cramps guitarists from La Puente. So next I'll go to a short section from my article called A Chumash Line, how an old email, again, apologies for the loading, how an old email in 5 PDFs revealed my native Californian roots. I'm going to read one of the last sections, section 4. It's July 2019. My mom's sister and I kneel at our ancestor's grave, just a few steps away from Whittier Boulevard and a mile from where she died on Zaring Street, in a house that no longer exists because it was raised by Caltrans in the 60s to build the 60 freeway. We pull weeds, dust off dirt, polish the marble with spit and shirt sleeves. We brush ants away, a futile effort, let them crawl. Imagine if we still had our land in San Luis Obispo, in Pismo Beach, or in Santa Ynez or Los Alamos, I say to my mom and sister. I hear their murmurs, their agreement. Yes, imagine, mija. And I do. What if the calzadas were not pushed off Pismo Beach in the 1840s? Then other colossal what if messages flooded my head. Like, what if the pinche Spaniards never came and built their damn churches? And what if there was never any Mexico? Viva Mexico today, by the way. What if there was never any Mexico or the United States of America or militarized national borders or broken treaties? And Maria Antonio Guerrero and her parents, husband, children, and their children got to keep their land, their home, their lives, their birthright, and their native California. Who would we be? Who were we before we were Mexican, before we were even American? At the end of her memoir, Native Country of the Heart, Chicana writer Sheri Moraga reflects on her mother's lineage and ancestral ties to the land of the San Gabriel Valley. Moraga's research revealed that her mother's Moraga family could be traced back to the first recorded baptism of un indio en la Misión de San Gabriel, and that the baptismal register was signed by none other than Fray Junipero Serra in the nearby Tongva village of Juyuvit in November of 1778. As Moraga writes, quote, "This matters to me somehow, the proximity of Serra's ethnocidal signature, my maternal family name, and the indigenous words for places I once knew as home. It is my own personal record that testifies to a complex system of mixed blood, misnomered historical erasure. Like Moraga, I am drawn to my mother's side in the indelible paper trail of our Chumash line that cannot be erased. I seek proof of our existence before we were misnamed. Reborn as Spanish, as Mexican, as American, it means something to be able to draw a bold, magic marker line between me and that woman whose grave we finally found to connect these particular dots. Who needs DNA tests when I got PDFs? The Chumash part of my maternal mother's side represents but one branch of my proverbial family tree. Your Nana Cruz was Yaqui, my auntie reminds me, and your grandfather was from Michoacan, evidence of at least another kind of Mexican Indian ancestry. And then we had the mythical Nana Josefa, who they say was Russian, and the reason why my sister and some of my aunties have light eyes, hairs, and skin. This is just my mother's side. My father's El Paso, Chihuahua side. His mother's Cepedas can be traced all the way to 1520 Spain. And one Tío did that in the 1980s and 90s before the internet made that easy. And that's a whole other story I can tell. But today, quote, there isn't a full-blooded, today, let me start that over. There's a quote from the LA Times I'm reading here. Today, there isn't a single full-blooded Chumash left, according to scholars. Our sisters, our partners, and I often visit Salvain, Los Olivos, Santa Ynez, Los Alamos, towns in Santa Barbara County, not too far from the Chumash Reservation and Casino. We celebrate birthdays, enjoy long teachers' weekends off, and mark important life moments together in those parts. My youngest sister even got married in Los Alamos, a testament to the power of the land and a meaning of our own ancestral connection to it. We feel it. And last but not least, a section from the article at the center of today's talk, which is the book review of East of East LA. And I guess from there, that would be a good jumping off point to our Platica and discussion and how all three of these pieces are work together and are tied together. Let me just find the section that I wanted to read. Like toppling a statue. On May 6, over 300 people logged into the Romans bookstore website to watch a reading and panel discussion of East, the making of Greater El Monte. In the middle of a pandemic, a deep recession, and a Black Lives Matter movement that has the nation reckoning with racism, it is hard to read, write, or care about anything else. But East is no ordinary book. The 300 plus people who showed up for the virtual panel suggests its relevance and timeliness for readers interested in radical perspectives of our local histories. Such a response demonstrates the urgency of our collective need and desire for new perspectives and solutions for solving age-old problems, such as systemic racism and capitalist exploitation. Here's Mora again, so sorry y'all, but she's important to my work anyway, and to the local digging up the dirt way. In her 2002 essay, An Irrevocable Promise, the San Gabriel-born Chicana poet and artist Sheri Moraga writes about theater as a way to, quote, dig up the dirt and uncover what we don't remember and find something of what is left of us. When we decenter whiteness and recenter silenced and marginalized voices, bodies, and experiences, when we write over the erasures and excavate what was buried, when we fill in gaps that whole academic disciplines and fields work to widen, when we look to our own families, communities, and friends for long lost answers, then we begin the work of digging up the dirt. East of East digs up the dirt of Greater El Monte to find what is left of us. For the authors and contributors born and raised there, for the indigenous, immigrant, multiracial, multicultural, and transnational communities brought to vivid life in these pages. It writes us back into the narratives that erased us, and writes new ones to remind us that white pioneer settlers are just part of the story, not the center of it, and certainly not all of it. Reading this book is the intellectual equivalent of toppling a statue of Serra or Sutter, or renaming a school or street after something other than a white settler, slaveholder, colonizer, or other heroic agent of systemic US American racism. During these times, East of East is a guide to our collective past struggles and fights for justice. You might want to add it to your radical reading lists.
That's perfect. I love this.
Gracias.
Gracias. Our colega, Profe Rafa, has joined us. Do you want to say hello, Rafa, and introduce yourself?
Hello, Rafa.
No se oye.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Okay, all right. Hello, everybody. Buenas tardes. Thank you so much, Melissa, for amazing words and the piece that you wrote on East of El Monte. I've shared it with my students, and we're so blessed to have you. Y buenas tardes to everybody who is on with us today. Thank you. Sorry for being late.
All right. Gracias for being here.
Awesome. So, Profe Melissa, how should we go forward? Would you like to piece these together? Would you like us to ask you questions?
You know, a little of both. I mean, just really quick, the piecing together, you know, the thread is San Gabriel Valley, South El Monte. And the other thing is that this work builds, you know, it builds on each other, right? And I think, you know, all of these were written like within a span of 4 years, you know, and so it's something I obviously keep coming back to, whether I realize it or not, when I think about writing. You know, but really, I think, you know, I think all three little sections, you know, from the Johnny Marr to, you know, the book review, is really the importance of what Moraga says, to dig up the dirt, right? Right where you are, because our stories are here. And we got to write them, because we know what happens when they write our stories and it ain't pretty. It's not good. So we got stories to tell, and we got to tell them. And, you know, I think that as a public scholar, and I say public scholar, and I mean that because not just because I was educated in the public school system right here in Whittier, La Habra, K through 12 public schools. I went to the University of California for my BA, right? I went to University of California for my PhD. I teach at a California state system. I taught at a public high school for 2 years. I taught at community colleges. I believe and I trust and I value public education. And as someone who has had the privilege of getting trained and getting all these fancy degrees and going all these places, you know, coming back, you know, I had to kind of, when I didn't get my contract renewed at Pitzer, and that's another story for another essay I wrote, in fact, that's also published, and I can send that to
yes, please do.
But, you know, in some ways the academic train kind of, you know, pushed me off its trails, or I was pushed off the academic train to tenure. And I think that lesson for me was about, okay, now what do I do? I still have all the, you know, just because I can't work full time in a tenure track job right now in academia, you know, what else can I do? And it brought me to the writing. And I actually wrote the Morrissey book, not in an academic position. It was after the contract. So, you know, and that was sticking to what I knew best. You know, I wanted to write about, at the time, a fan community I knew well and I loved. I felt it was a story that needed to be told. I felt like I had to be the one to do it because of being a member of that community and being a longtime fan. Not so much these days, and we can talk about that later if you like. Still an important part of the moment because I was writing an LA story that was a transnational story, an LA story that took me so many places that I can only dream about. And to share how important it is to again, digging up the dirt. And I have to come back to that. And probably it's worth saying that I was in that play when Moraga produced it in 2010, I was cast. So digging up the dirt since around then, 2010, 2011, and then after 2014, when Pitzer didn't invite me back, is when I had a little crisis. And I just had to think about, like, you know, there was a turning point where I had to really consider, like, what do I do with my work? And as someone who felt like I was a public scholar and at least, you know, a teacher, a profe, an instructor, a writer, like, I had to tell my stories. Like, there was no, you know, there was no other way for me to survive, really. And quite literally, at that Moraga essay, I'll share with you, I wrote that to live through it and to survive it. And then I get to the other side of it. So it's also healing, right? The stories we tell are healing. We all have a lot to heal from. We have 7 generations. If you believe in the Red Road and indigenous thinking, we got 7 generations to heal behind us, and we can heal the next 7. So I think I see a lot of that converging in the work I do now for LA Taco, in the work, you know, having, and of course, this is how we know it works, right? One thing kind of begets the other. And so, you know, getting a little bit of exposure around LA, getting to be on the radio and talk about things, getting to publish in places like the LA Times, the New York Times, you know, I have a record now that I don't have to rely on academe necessarily, but also to be able to bridge the two and to have one foot in the other. And that's my responsibility, I think, as a public educator, like writ large, right? To be a public educator, for me, doesn't mean I just teach the students that enroll in my classes. It's like, I have a public education and it's my responsibility to share it and to use it in a way to tell our stories, to write our stories the best way I know how to.
Absolutely. That deeply resonates. And I think, well, just so you know, on the chat, I reshared some of the links that you shared with me and ones that I have found. So folks who are on the call, please make sure you look at that. I'll reshare them again in a little bit. But one of the things that I wanted to revisit was your piece on the Chumash Line. I was reading it earlier, and then of course listening to you and thinking about the emotion that you feel on the alleged independence of Mexico Day. Like,
especially with a name like Hidalgo. Hello.
exactly. So, you know, and I know that you are on that red road as a Chicana, as a queer Chicana. And so, or at least that's what I believe. And so I would love to know kind of how you came to that piece, and how you're making sense of again, the contradictions of our Mexicanidad, as well as as our lost indigenous heritage for so many of us. And then just you actually recovering some of it. I was like, oh my God, how is that possible? And if you can tell us a little bit, for folks who haven't read the article, you literally found your great, you know, what is it, tia?
Yeah, no, it's my grandmother's grandmother.
Grandmother's grandmother.
My maternal line now. So, so thank you, Anita. So to answer the question kind of more like directly, and then I'll kind of back up, is that, you know, the piece, I have been wanting to write about this episode. So long story short, the PDFs that I refer to in the piece, for about 10 years, since back when I was still writing my dissertation, in fact, around 2008, 2009, 2010, something like that, I'm living in East LA with my grandparents, and, you know, my aunt on my mom's side, one of my mom's sisters, you know, shared us with an email. And when I say us, I'm talking about my mom's siblings. She's like the oldest of 9, my mother is. And so all my aunts and uncles, and then I'm on this list because I'm the oldest like niece in the family. And then my aunt also knows like that I was looking for scholarship money. And that was sort of the impetus, because we had a cousin who used these documentation, the Ventura cousin I mentioned in the article, who used these documents to secure some kind of money. And that was the impetus. But, you know, so she sends these documents, you know, Mija, they did it, you should try it too, you know, you need cash, you're a student, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't know how I felt, you know, I was already on a 4 dissertation at the time. So I felt like, well, I'm not sure if I could do this. You know, I left alone, and then, you know, I finished my dissertation and other things happened, and I actually forgot about that stuff. So then fast forward, and I'm working, in fact, with the Chumash elder, who I've been, you know, working with kind of spiritually the last year or so. And it was kind of being, you know, just the fact that my family we're always finding our way up to Los Alamos, to Chumash land, anything north of Malibu to San Luis Obispo is Chumash land. We're on Tongva land right now. I am in Whittier. And so it, you know, sort of 10 years later, and then, you know, resurfacing, you know, these documents, or thinking about these documents again, like, you know, we have a Chumash line. And as the family PhD, you know, scholar, I felt like it was sort of on me to do it. And it took a while to get those actual documents, because my aunt had them from a cousin, and then they were emailed, and then I didn't get all the documents. And so it was finally a matter of like getting all of them and then having them explained to me. One of my great aunts, my tia Carmen, who is actually with my mom today, and I don't know if they may or may not be on this call, but, you know, one of my last surviving tias, because my grandmother has passed already. So this is a grandmother whose grandmother it is, whose grave we found. There are all these, you know, oh yeah, that's, you know, I remember this is my Aunt Carmen now, my grandmother's sister, saying that she remembers going to her grandma Antonia's home. And this is Maria Antonia, the Chumash elder. Part of the story, and part of the reason why we even had these documents, and why Maria Antonia was even in the newspaper, is because we found out, or we're assuming that she was one of the quote unquote last full-blooded Chumash native indigenous people to live in LA when she died. She died in the 1950s. She was like in her 90s when she died, or almost 90. So that quote I read from the LA Times, I mean, obviously this thing about blood quantum, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But there was something around like, you know, like, what do you mean the last full-blood Chumash? Like, how do they even know that? Like, how is it possible to know that? Like, so to know that this relative, this ancestor of mine was in the news for that reason when she died, well, there goes the last Chumash, you know, full-blooded. I was like, and learning that, you know, for lots of reasons, we're alive, we're not full-blooded, you know, all of these things around being mixed. And that's what prompted me to finally sit down with these documents. And what happened was my mom and my sister Melinda, I think, believe it, she's here on this call. The 3 of us, my mom, my sister Melinda, we finally, my mom, let's go find this grave, you know, because we know she's at Calvary Cemetery in East LA. And when we found that grave, it was like this whole, I can't speak for my mom and my sister, but I know what I felt like. I felt like, holy shit, like this is her. This is my grandmother's grandmother. And she is like the last, you know, kind of tangible, whatever that can mean, connection we have to this line, like our proof. And, you know, and this is in the middle of all this like genealogy stuff, you know, you can submit your blood and they tell you, you know, but there was something I was resisting around that because, you know, precisely because of the conversations around blood quantum and what that means and how, you know, how it's used to exclude and deny and all of this. And there is something around tracing that and literally making the line that, you know, the trip to the grave in East LA in Calvary Cemetery, where all kind of Calzadas are buried. Calzada is my mother's family name, the maternal name. And to really just be able to trace that line through these documents was something else. Because the contradiction is we're tracing them through the Catholic Church records, you know, we're tracing them through birth certificates, we're tracing it through a newspaper, like 2 different newspaper articles from the 50s. We don't know if one of them was in the LA Times or what the papers were because we don't have that information, but 2 of these articles that had contradictory information in and of itself. So all these kind of official records that we had, that here we are, we're trying to find like our native indigenous Chumash relative with these Western imperialist documents. And yet what else do we have? And that was partly asking my question, like really throwing into what does it mean to be able to kind of trace through paper, like they do on those shows with Henry Louis Gates, right? They roll out the censuses, but what happened? Who were we before all that? You know, who were we? Who were Maria Antonia's parents? They were probably born near San Luis Obispo too. And what about their parents? But there's no record, right? So who were we? So it was me trying to answer that kind of question, like before nationalism, before we speak in the language we speak, before we're called Mexican, or like, who were we? And that still kind of remains that question that drove me. Like, who were we before all of this? We can find Maria Antonia, we can verify our Chumash line. Where else does it go? Does it stop at her? You know, where else can we go? And will we ever know? And I think that's part of it, is we may never know, you know, for the reason that we, you know, we have to rely on the imperialist tools.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it also resonates given all of our long histories in like social movement, right? To think about how we authentically show up, who we get to call ourselves, and how you know, what spaces we're accepted or not. I was joking with my students on Monday and saying, you know, LA people, Texas people too, but LA people are some of the most territorial people I know. Like, you know, you claim your hood, like, you know, you saw the chat, how quickly it, you know, like it build up, because there's this incredible pride and this incredible sense of connection and grounding. And yet, like, there's so much history, as you point out, so much dirt that hasn't been dug up.
Yeah.
And so I just want to repeat that piece that you read. It says, what if the Pinche Spaniards never came and built their damn churches? What if there was never any Mexico or United States of America, or militarized national borders, right? People can't even imagine that. Or broken treaties, or Maria Antonia Guerrero and her parents, husband, children, and their children got to keep their land, their homes, their lives, their birthright in their native California. Again, I just want folks to like really sit with that thought on this, you know, Independence Day of, you know, Mexico, and just to think about all the stuff that we have created, all the structures of domination and dehumanization that we are up against in this moment, you know, and the fact that our nation and around the world, but specifically our nation I'm talking about, is in deep grief because of these structures that we have allowed to be created, that we cling to, right? So again, some of them for a great sense of pride, because it's all we have is our hood, right? Our neighborhood, our cross streets where we grew up. And then others of it, the imposed stuff that we have accepted as truth, right? The borders are not true, they are false, right? And so the way that we fight over those, whether or not those borders are real, really resonated for me when I was listening and reading to that line. So thank you.
Yes.
Colegas, Profe Dani, Profe Rafa, do y'all have any questions or comments? And everybody else on the call, please feel free to raise your little blue hand or come on screen and ask a question, or even put it in the chat while we're waiting.
No, I just wanted to make the comment because that really struck me too, the quote, because I did grow up in that neighborhood, and listening to like the podcast and reading the book, you know, El Monte has this claim of like the end of the Santa Fe Trail as like that was the beginning of this thing, and like you're right, there is this sense of like territorial kind of connection to this land that I think for me it never really made sense that that was it, right? There's a park in El Monte called Pioneer Park, that there's still a house that was like the first house in El Monte, and it has a little wagon, covered wagon, and it, I don't know if the wagon's still there or not, but I remember then like I went to a Ligor school, which is right around there, and they took us on the field trip there, and like the whole dedication was to the like the creation of this city, right? And again, it never really made sense to me. It was like, okay, yeah, but what then? And then in the little picture of the end of the Santa Fe Trail, right, there's actually some native folks there, and it's like, wait, who are they, right? Like, you know, tell me more about that. But we don't have any of that, right? Especially in our public school systems there. Yeah. And I just remember, I mean, I was telling Professor that these things are bringing, these texts are bringing us back so many memories. And one memory that I had is like, they took us there. This little Cholillo guy knocked the door down of the oldest house and he's like, let me go in there. And he kicked the door off. And I don't know what happened to him ever again. But again, you know, it was this moment at that time that I was just like, inside I was like, yes, but I was like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble, because I was, yeah. But you know, again, it was this moment that, again, in this kind of territorial kind of like, you know, connection to this land. Like, I think you're right. Like, you know, it calls to you, right? It's something there that, again, to me, at least, this book is kind of like, what do you call it? Like validating a lot of those feelings that I grew up with that, again, I never knew how to articulate, and probably I still don't, because I'm having a hard time doing it. But you know, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is the book, by the way, too, that your prof is talking about, the East of East LA. And you know, I'm lucky, you know, to have just come across this as someone who, again, not from El Monte or even South El Monte, but you know, I would say the greater SGV area, right? If we are talking about Montebello and Whittier, and that, you know, geographical part of LA, anything east of the river, right? East of East. And you see, you know, newcomers to LA, you know, they want to say Northeast LA, like Los Feliz. It's like, nope, you got to cross the river, you know, East LA, you know, and then you cross and then we go by the freeway, right? You cross the 710, then you're even for, you know, you cross the 605, woo, you're almost in Orange County, right? So, you know, my childhood was the freeways and the Thomas Guide. But, you know, with this book, I came to it, or, you know, I came to write about it was because I not only knew the editors and the contributors, so Romeo Guzman and Caribeña Fragosa, I met them doing my Morrissey research. So here's another kind of seed, you know, and I started this Morrissey fan, and I met them through the South El Monte Arts Posse in an event that they threw that I actually wrote about in my Morrissey book. So I had made that connection. And then my partner, Stacy, who has the essay on the lesbian bars, which is a huge essay. And those of you who are interested in reading more reviews about this book, Hector Torbar, who's a writer for the LA Times, he's a novelist, just also reviewed this book in the LA Review of Books, so LARB, and he actually devotes a good chunk to that essay, because again, the question that Macias asked in that piece is, what does it mean? What if we were to reimagine El Monte as a center of an LGBT community, right? In the way that we want to always imagine West Hollywood or something like that is like the gay center of LA. So what happens again if we reorient, if we listen to the voices of the lesbians and the working class buchas and their femmes who hung out at these bars, and in fact there was like a circle of them, right? So again, recovering these queer histories, these you know, stories that we have that just don't make it, you know, anywhere, not even in the LA Times kind of thing. So I came in that partially, you know, it was with my partner had made a contribution, and because I knew the contributors from other projects. They're also the publishers of that Boom California website, which is a great website that, you know, really focuses on, it's considered a peer-reviewed, you know, public-facing scholarly website. So everything they do too is going to be very kind of hyper-local, focusing on these kind of hidden California stories. So I recommend that too, Boom California. So that's how I came to this. You know, they asked me if I wanted to write about it, partially because I had already been familiar with them and with the content, but also because I'm from the area too. And I'm not, well, I guess SGV or El Monte adjacent, I guess, if we want to use that term now. And as someone who didn't contribute to it, as someone who, you know, kind of read it and wrote it, it was such a, it's a beautiful book. What I love is what do they call it? The multi-vocality, to use a word right, many voices. So, you know, even though it's kind of an academic book, it's published in an academic press, the contributors they're everybody. They're artists, they're academics, they're writers, they're journalists, they're photographers, they're poets, they're short story writers, they're fiction writers. You get voices from all over. And I think that's one of the important things that this book does, is that it doesn't just, it's truly a public history told by people from the public, right? Told from people who grew up there. So it's homegrown. And that's the other thing, writing our stories because we are from here, we live it, we know it, we have histories of it, not somebody just jumping in and writing about, you know, the SGV. So it's very much a kind of a homegrown, you know, done with love, done with personal roots and histories. And, you know, I think this is one of those books where, you know, just the stuff you learn that you don't even know. I mean, who knew that Whittier Narrows was used in Finchy Birth of a Nation by B.W. Griffith? Like, this is the stuff I'm talking, like, you know, blowing my mind, like, oh my God, you know, and I haven't been to Lake, you know, I went for the first time like a month ago, and I'm like, how is it I grew up around here and I've never been to Lake, you know, that was just never part of my experience growing up. And then so now going, having read the book, and just imagine like, oh my God, to think that it was used as a Tarzan set back in the Hollywood days. You know, the fact that Griffith used it to double as the South in his racist ass movie. So, you know, this is part of our history too. It's not always pretty. But I think that, you know, we don't just want to write feel-good history either. We don't just want to make it all rosy, because it's not, you know, it sucks to be a, you know, conquered, colonized subject when, you know, you have all these layers working and you're just trying to dig and find some truth. And so these pocket, you know, it balances, you know, the obscure, you know, the racist, but also, you know, there's other stuff that happened there, you know. There was a Hicks camp, you know, there were community organizers, there were Chicano movement stuff happening here in the 60s. There was punk, you know, the LA punk scene, you know. So to me, that's also, this is the people's history of El Monte, right? Told by the people who lived it and who lived through it and who remember it. And it's remarkable for that reason, because we don't see a lot of this kind of scholarship. And it's rigor, you know, it's well researched, you know. Mm-hmm. It's that's the other thing. It's like when I say there is some scholarly rigor to it, that doesn't mean that, you know, there has to be, but in spite of that, it's so accessible, you know. Mm-hmm. It is for the tias who remember going to those backyard punk shows, you know. It is for the ones that remember back when the Starlight Cinema was up there. It is for the people who used to go to Legion Hall and dance to Art Laboe. Like, those are the stories that, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, they're part of us, they're part of our families, and they're part of the fabric.
Absolutely. It's a good model, right? It's a good model for similar type of books. As you talked, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was like a queer LA book written in the same style, right? And I'm sure anyone, you know, any one of the folks who are listening can think of the different foci that they're interested in. Absolutely. And to think about, you know, what does it look like for not just academics to be writing these books, but people telling their stories, or us helping folks, you know, bring them into that space, because that's a powerful experience.
Yeah. And where do we go? You know, what kind of archives? And, you know, the big thing with this book is that there was no archive of this kind of other history of El Monte. They had to build it. So this is what happens when, after 8 years, you know, a bunch of scholars, artists, thinkers, residents, you know, people who care about the histories, you know, it took 8 years to build in this archive. You know, we were talking, there should have been a chapter on, say, the Valley Mall, and there wasn't. So it's like, okay, there could be a volume 2. And you're right, Anita, you know, Monrovia, Whittier, you know, Montebello. I mean, again, the micro, you can get really super hyper local, and at the same time get expansive with the stories that you tell on this hyper local level. And it's a beautiful model for all of that stuff. And it's not just, you know, it's not just kind of locked into one academic discipline either, right? Sure, it's history, right? But it's, again, there's fiction there. You know, you can teach this in urban planning classes. You can teach this in political organizing classes, you know. It's pretty far reaching, I think, in terms of its you know, its purpose. And that's what also makes it really valuable to me.
Any other questions from anyone?
The swap meet marquee. Yeah. Looking at some of the comments here.
Yeah, Jesse, I think, is in our class, in my class. Maybe he wants to share his recollections.
Salud, can you hear me? Oh, okay. How's it going, everyone? Hey, what's up, Profe Rafa? How you been? Okay. Yeah, I can't say I grew up in El Monte, or like I grew up in the SGV like my whole life. I have family that's been living in El Monte their whole lives, and like the stuff you were talking about earlier, like just like bring back a lot of memories. Or how Prophet Danny was talking about like the Pioneer Park and the house that was there. It was like, since I was a kid, like I used to be like at the bus stop that me and my mom would catch to go back to Pasadena, because that's where I got baptized in El Monte, or like about baptismo there. I guess because it was cheaper than here, St. Andrews here in Pasadena, so it makes sense. But yeah, like all of that like has always been fenced off, and I never was curious about the Pioneer Park until like, and now it just makes sense. It was like, obviously it has anything, the word pioneer is gonna have colonial history to it. Mm-hmm. So like I don't know, since I was little, like, and I saw the way the house was built, like I was just like, nah, I kind of don't care about that. Like I just want to hang out with my cousins. But I guess like somehow something innate was like telling me like to reject that or something. Like, I don't know. So that's like something that's like shared with like the history of El Monte too. Like, so yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that Lion Farm, right? The El Monte High School is actually the Lions, right? And for a long time, I never knew why they were the Lions until these things started coming out, right? I was like, oh, I didn't know the MGM Lion was from El Monte Farms, right? And all that stuff. So definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a trip to make these connections, you know. That's the other thing is like, you know, I'm in the middle of reading another book of history. I'm not necessarily like promoting it or anything, but just as another example of the kind of history that we're talking about. It's a book called Stealing Home. And and those of you who are Dodger fans probably won't, appreciate, but it's the story of what happens when, when they had what did it take to bring Dodger Stadium here, and how, the premise of the book is that Dodger Stadium should never exist, should not have existed, should never have been built. And again, right, my family is a big Dodger fan. We grew up here, I mean, that like, what do you do? It's a contradiction you got to deal with, and I'm looking, I'm in the middle of reading this book, and I'm reminded too, it's a very similar kind of project in the sense of digging up dirt, right? Like telling the story from the perspective of the people on the ground whose neighborhoods were being raised, right? The Mexicans who built up the neighborhood, the three neighborhoods of Palo Verde, and the three neighborhoods that sort of make up Chavez Ravine. Bishop, I think, is one of them. Telling the stories of the gross kind of political movidas that had to happen. Telling, part of it, learning about things like Paul Robeson. And if I'm not sure if folks here know who Paul Robeson is, but, we know who Jackie Robinson is, right? But we don't know who Paul Robeson is. And to know, for example, that Jackie Robinson, everyone likes to celebrate him as having broken the color barrier, but also the way that Major League Baseball used him to testify against, say, Paul Robeson, who was a communist and, who was anti-nationalist. And so, it really, sitting there watching Dodger games, like, we're not supposed to think about this, right? Don't think about how this, just look at the beautiful view and go Dodgers. And, and I do, and I have, and much like being a Morrissey fan right now, it doesn't sit well with me, because we're in a moment right now. It's like, I know too much now. And we have to question, we have to ask hard questions that really tear at the things that we love or that we thought we loved. And in a book like that, again, sort of telling the untold stories, telling the story from a way, approaching it from a way that, it seems like it might come out of left field, but in fact, it makes a lot of sense when you see. To me, that's also the kind of book that does a lot of the work that a book like, not digging up the dirt, that the East of East book does. Literally digging up the dirt, starting from the ground, not even the grassroots level. You got to go beyond the grass, because we have to fill in all the gaps, and I think that was the point of me mentioning that too, is that it fills in a lot of gaps. what we tend to learn is like a kind of big whitewashed, you know, broad strokes, paintbrush, you know, very general. We're not taught, you know, the details, the things that fill in the picture. And so you know, people who write these histories and really go into the archives and they talk to people, they do the oral histories. They don't just, you know, rely on going to the library. They talk to the people. And that's one of the things I've learned writing for LA Taco, in fact, is to talk to people. Because I was trained as a scholar where I lived in the archives. I was writing about books and books didn't talk back to me. I just, you know, write about English lit, you know, so it's very different. You know, I had to learn some, I'm like, oh, this is what an ethnographer does, kind of, oh, this is what an oral historian does. So that really taught me, that really changed how I write. Because I didn't learn that in academia necessarily because of the training I had. Folks who have other kind of training obviously do, you know, but my training, because it was literature, I was English, you know, my objects were paperbacks. To go and talk to people, to really get a different side of it is so important.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Rafa, did you have a question? And then I just want to do a time check. It's 5:27. I think we said we would go till 5:30, but we can take this question and any last burning question from the guests.
It'll be a quick question, and it really is to support our classes, Melissa. You know, for our classes, we're going to be assigning oral histories. We're going to be assigning them. Some of us might be creating zines in some of our classes. And I wanted to ask you, can you share maybe 1 or 2 tips for our students, you know, that will help them, guide them in perhaps conducting their own history, collecting family members' testimonial that helps them fill in the gaps that you're talking about, that perhaps tells the story of their neighborhood through the stories of their loved ones or, you know, people who they want to interview. Any tips?
Any tips? That's a great question. And I'm still learning, but I felt like the first thing I can say, or the first tip, is to listen. To listen to your elders. And it's a lesson that you know, I'm 47 and it took me a long time to learn it. When my mother would say, you don't really know it. I was like, oh my God, Mama's right. Listen to your elders, because, you know, in these moments, I don't want to sound cliche, but we're in uncertain times in particular, and listen to your elders and ask them while they're here, while they are with you. That's tip number 1, is ask them and listen to them while you're here. Tip number 2, you know, I get really good at taking notes, y'all. And this, what I mean by taking notes is not this, you know, because there's something, you know, when I go do my LA Taco interviews, I take both, you know, I need my voice recorder so I can go back and listen. But in my initial discussion with folks when I'm interviewing them, I'll talk and I'll listen and I'll jot down, you know, key things, because the idea, I find that the engaging conversation is just as important, because that's also where a lot of cool things will come up. You know, it may not have been on a list of questions that you want to ask, but in talking and having a conversation rather than like an interview, you know, have a conversation and, you know, really just kind of get good at taking notes. You know, what is the information you want to distill and take from this conversation that you had? What is the story? Right. And I know I don't mean to sound like a journalist, because I'm not by any means a trained journalist in that way, but really, what is the story? Because we have a story to tell. And how is this story different from what we've maybe heard before, right? And to me, a lot of it is writing things down, thinking about it later, coming back to it. That's a process, I guess. And so it's more of a process comment, I think, than anything else. But process is so important, you know. So listen and take good notes and be reflective of it. You know, what gaps is this story filling in? You know, I hope that was okay. And if you want a little bit more, I hope that helped for the student. I hope that made sense for the students. It may not want to take more notes like this, but you asked me, and that is important.
That's perfect. And, you know, if anybody else wants to see, Annabelle says it makes sense. If anybody else wants to ask more questions, please, you know, drop them in the chat. We can always send them to Dr. Hidalgo. What I would love right now is a picture of all of us, whoever wants to be a part of this photo. If you want to come on for this picture, I would love for folks to come on with us.
That'd be great.
I'll give you 3 seconds before I Oh, yay. Thank you, Melinda. All right.
Hey, and Combs, I'm gonna out you real quick, Combs. You're looking at the bass player for Elvis Disciples right there, and he the article about punk music in that book. He knows those people, and I'm like, why aren't you in that book, Combs? But I learned so much from him about
love it,
about the gun club. So, and that's my sister who went with me to the grave site.
Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. And just so folks know, Melissa and her sisters have a band too. They haven't played in a long time, but as soon as they get back together, we're there. Maybe we can bring them to Cal State LA.
That would be fun. Now currently, my brother-in-law, in fact, they play in a band too. So very musical siblings.
Awesome. And I'm a Cal State LA graduate too. Woohoo! Go Eagles, Golden Eagles.
Awesome. I think we're ready for a picture. I'm going to take two. One spotlighting Dr. Hidalgo. So if we can get you, let's see, really quickly spotlight it right there. 1, 2, 3. And then one with all of us.
Yay.
1, 2, 3. Gracias. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I know it's late. Here's Ray saying hi. And this is going to be recorded, so I'm happy to send it out to folks. You know, Profe Melissa, if you want to share it with your students, or if, you know, other folks want to revisit it, I would love to share it with all of you, with your family even. And just thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It warms my heart to see you, to feel your emotion, to hear your words, and to like pay homage to your wisdom.
Gracias so much. What an honor to be.
Thank you so much.
Everybody, beautiful to see your faces, if not meet you this way. And thank you all again for the students, everybody showing up tonight. I know we're all to be zoomed out, so it's really great to see you all and that you showed up. So thank you so much.
Yes, go stretch, eat some food, and enjoy your life for the day. We will have more guest lectures, so we'll send out more information about that very soon. And we're definitely focusing on different communities in Los Angeles, trying to uncover that history and retell the stories.
Excellent.
So gracias to everybody.
Share my
Bye.
information. You know, shoot me an email whenever. I'm happy to answer your questions if I can.
Awesome.
I just wanted to mention too, I did use your mom's work in my dissertation too, so thank you. Thank you.
Buddy. Thank you.
Yes, great work. Thank you for your brilliance, friend.
Gracias.
Have a great work. Thank you.
Gracias, everybody.